Right friends, welcome back to Learning Space newspaper editorials discussion of 24th January, and today I am going to deliberate on 3 articles of The Hindu. And yesterday I talked about one article with regard to manufacturing sector which appeared in Times of India yesterday, but after going through that article I found nothing much in that article, so that is why I am not discussing that. And today we are going to deliberate on the editorial of The Hindu, which talks about Xi Jinping championing the cause of globalization. That is one article. Second article is about the discussion with regard to fiscal deficit, whether high fiscal deficit is more for the country or not. There are diverging opinions with regard to increasing fiscal deficit, and that we are going to throw some light on that. And the third point is democratic deficit. That means the democracy in our country, or as a matter of fact in some of the democracies, there is a deficit, and the article is with regard to rich poor gap. So, these 3 articles we are going to deliberate, and the first one is globalization's new spokesman. It is very rare. Normally the head of a country like China talking about globalization, or you can say championing the term globalization. And this World Economic Forum, this is non-governmental organization, and it is famous for Davos Summit. Davos Summit was held recently, and Klaus Schwab, he promoted this organization in the year 1971, and in its 47-year-old history, for the first time Chinese president participated in Davos celebrations. And nowadays some of the western countries are talking about protectionism, but now China is championing the cause of globalization. This article is all about that. And before understanding this, at present, what is the present day context in the world? In the world, the present day context is more and more uncertainties day by day. Job losses are taking place, more and more protectionist tendencies, and Trump election is one more signal after Brexit, and France elections due to be held, and Marine Le Pen, another nationalist or protectionist you can say, is another contender, and a slowdown in economic growth, slump in world trade. World trade is in fact growing at much slower pace. It is around 1.5% or so, whereas the global GDP is growing at around 2.5%, and world trade is growing at around 1.5 to 2%, and this is for the first time during the past 30-40 years global trade is trailing GDP growth. And under these circumstances, now let us look at what is meant by globalization. Globalization is nothing but integration of economies. Here I have given with the schematic diagram. There is one wall, vertical wall. One side there are some countries, let us say some advanced economies, and on the other side some emerging economies, and of course Taiwan is not, it is already developed. I am talking about China and India. So, basically this globalization talks about reducing the controls and facilitating goods, services, investments, technology, people. That is all about globalization. And prior to 1978, if you look at China, prior to 1991, if you look at India, there were so many barriers. That is why I put the wall. There were so many barriers for free flow of trade, for free flow of investments, for free flow of people, and lot many restrictions were there in those days. And gradual removal of these restrictions is nothing but liberalization. So, please understand, liberalization is gradually removing restrictions. All the restrictions, or you can say all the barriers, cannot be removed in single day. Gradually these barriers for free flow of trade, for free flow of investments are being removed, and this process in India started in 1991, which is known as the year of new economic policy. So, since 1991, the gradual removal of restrictions with regard to foreign trade, with regard to foreign investments, that started, and now it is taken place in our country also since 1991, and the removal of these barriers is liberalization. Please understand, removal of these barriers is liberalization. And another important aspect is in domestically also opening up more and more sectors for private participation is also a part of this liberalization. So, liberalization means opening up more and more sectors for private participation and opening up of the economies with regard to trade as well as investments for foreign players. So, that is liberalization. Once these barriers are removed, that is globalization. So, liberalization leads to globalization. Once the barriers are removed, it leads to globalization. And another aspect is privatization. When liberalization, globalization takes place, public sector enterprises cannot function or cannot take that competition, and here this public sector enterprises sold to private entities, and this is privatization. So, after independence, several public sector enterprises came to the forefront with a lot of government support, and it resulted in lot of lethargy. So, making this public sector enterprises, selling them indirectly, selling them directly to private entities is nothing but privatization. So, these three terms you should have clear idea: liberalization, globalization, privatization, and this all started in the year 1991 in our country, which is known as new economic policy, right. So, this is all about liberalization, globalization, privatization. So, globalization means that the barrier is removed. And please understand that the barrier cannot be removed entirely. Countries require some restrictions, and when the barriers are removed, then it leads to globalization. So, subsequently, free flow of investments. Free flow of investments. Hyundai is established in our country, Ford, Toyota, Pepsi, Nestle, Mercedes-Benz. So, these are all established because of the globalization. Right. So, if you look further, I am talking more about liberalization. Liberalization means so many restrictions on exports and imports were there prior to 1991, and they are gradually being removed. And if you look at FPI, FDI, there were so many restrictions till 1991, and they are being gradually removed from 1991. So, this is all about basically liberalization, liberalizing foreign trade, liberalizing foreign investments. So, this is all about the liberalization. So, liberalization is required for globalization, right. So, liberalization is essential for globalization. Without removing the controls, without opening up more and more sectors for private sector participation, it is there is no meaning of globalization. So, this is all about liberalization, globalization. And you may have a pertinent doubt why India waited till 1991, because we got independence in 1947 with the impression of getting self-reliance. The then government thought of waiting for some time. So, any child requires some support, parental support, society support till 25 years. That is why for nations also, after getting independence, they require some support. That is why India waited initially, right. Now, this is foreign portfolio investment, directly investing in stock market. Several restrictions were removed, and I gave here what are the advantages of foreign portfolio investments, or you can say what are the traits of foreign portfolio investments. And it is known as hot money, passive investment, highly volatile, these things please do not forget. And this is foreign direct investment. Foreign direct investment basically values, in fact, establishes companies directly in our country. So, this is active investment. So, before understanding this article, understanding these things is very much essential. And what are the advantages of globalization? I listed out here. What are the advantages of globalization, and subsequently what are the disadvantages of globalization? And after reading all these things, then you may be in a position to understand about this editorial. So, advantages if you see, it is improved quality and lower prices for various products. Nowadays, we are getting more and more mobile phones, more and more cars at cheaper prices and wider choice for the consumers, and competition resulted in increased productivity of domestic industries, much higher standards of living than earlier for some sections of society. Much higher standards of living, at least for some sections of society in our country, resulted because of globalization. Then another advantage is technology transfer, technology upgradation benefited domestic companies to some extent. So, technology transfer. Then another advantage, especially when you look at India, is IT sector proliferated immensely. It benefited IT sector like anything after globalization, and local companies supplying raw materials also got benefited, right. So, these are advantages of globalization, but what are the disadvantages? Why the world is nowadays, some of the countries are against globalization, what you call protectionism. This well-off sections in urban areas are only benefited. Well-off sections in urban areas are only benefited, and this is the precise reason why Donald Trump got elected as the president of USA, and some small producers were decimated due to global competition. Small producers, especially the manufacturers of toys, the manufacturers of batteries, these were decimated because of global competition. Nowadays, Chinese toys are going everywhere across the world. So, small companies got decimated. Then, due to the shutdown of some MSMEs, several people got jobless. So, these are the disadvantages of globalization, and whatever the reason, nowadays several protectionist tendencies are coming across the countries. So, if you look at the current editorial, I told all this as history, because unless you understand what is globalization, what is liberalization, what is privatization, you may not be able to judge the essence of this editorial. As per Xi Jinping, I already told you, Chinese president visited for the first time Davos summit of World Economic Forum, and he stated that current problems are not due to economic globalization. Xi Jinping, because Western countries previously used to talk about globalization. Basically, globalization is the brainchild of Western countries, and subsequent to Second World War, this globalization, or you can say complex web of manufacturing, evolved by this time, and this is totally the brainchild of Western countries. R&D is taking place in America, manufacturing is taking place in China, accessories are taking place, accessories manufacturing in Malaysia, call centers in Bengaluru in India. So, all these things basically complex web of globalization, and in fact, this is the brainchild of Western world, and because of this China benefited a lot, and now Western countries are talking against globalization. Western countries are talking about against globalization, and some of the countries are talking about protectionism, some of the countries are talking about nativism, some of the countries are talking about nationalism. Under these circumstances, the speech to the World Economic Forum by Xi Jinping assumed significance. Look at these 2-3 points. Current problems are not due to economic globalization. Economic globalization has not created the present day problems. The present day problems are due to mass migration because of conflicts taking place across the world. There are several conflicts taking place across the world, especially West Asia as well as North Africa, and the present day problems are because of this mass migration and conflicts, and countries immensely benefited because of globalization. That is the essence of the Xi Jinping's address to World Economic Forum. And now China badly needs globalization, because China is the global manufacturer, and without globalization their industry, their manufacturing will suffer badly, and that is why Xi Jinping wants to become champion for globalization. That is the essence of this editorial. Now, it appears China is taking the lead to project positive aspects of globalization, whereas some Western countries are opposing it. Right. So, we deliberated about globalization, liberalization, privatization, and let us look at one important article, the price of fiscal folly. And here, please read this question. The government should desist from borrowing more and more money and preempting resources from future generations. Critically examine. This is not my statement, this is the statement of Urjit Patel. Urjit Patel a few days ago stated that government should not borrow much, government should desist from more and more borrowing, and it will rob the future generations of resources. If government is borrowing more and more money, then in future interest payments will become substantial, and the future generations have to face the tax burden because of more interest payment. That is the statement of Urjit Patel, but this article negates that view. We are going to deliberate these two views, and here the article talks about 3-4 points. The first point is government can borrow more if it results in creation of assets. I will tell you in layman terms, if you are borrowing 1 lakh rupees, if you are borrowing 1 lakh rupees and you can spend it in 2 ways. One way of spending it is you can go to Goa, stay in some 3-star or 5-star hotel, and you can spend holiday there with 1 lakh rupees. And the other option is by using this 1 lakh and borrowing some money, you can purchase some house site or house. So, 2 ways this can be used. First one is revenue expenditure, second one is capital expenditure. So, this article talks about governments can borrow more money provided they create capital assets. Governments can borrow more money provided they create capital assets. So, government can borrow more if it results in creation of assets. Borrowing is okay to such an extent that this borrowing must create some assets, right. How the government spends the borrowed money, allocation to capital revenue is more important than looking at borrowing money. What is more important is how government spends that money. Then aspects of universal basic income is not feasible. We deliberated in detail about universal basic income, and the aspect of universal basic income is not feasible, and public investment should be followed by expansionary monetary policy. So, this is the essence of this article, and let us look at fiscal deficit. Here government spends something, government revenue is something, the gap between expenditure and revenue is fiscal deficit. And every year government borrows around 5 lakh crores of rupees. Every year government borrows rupees 5 lakh crores of rupees, and accumulation of this deficit is known as public debt. Every year government borrows around 5 lakh crores of rupees and it accumulates year after year, that is known as public debt. So, public debt is nothing but accumulation of fiscal deficit over years, and here fiscal deficit cannot exceed 3% of GDP as per FRBM Act of 2003. As per Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act of 2003, fiscal deficit maximum is 3% of GDP, and government is about to reach this figure. Till date it is higher than 3%, but this year 2017-18 initially government stated government will restrict fiscal deficit to 3% of GDP. That is one part, and there is a lot of thinking going on nowadays. Borrow more to create more resources, to construct dams, to construct highways, to construct hospitals. Borrow more so as to create resources. So, as to look at this aspect, N.K. Singh committee was established basically to look at modifications to FRBM Act. So, N.K. Singh committee will look at modifications to FRBM Act of 2003, and the thought process in the government at present is borrow more money. Fiscal deficit can go up to 3.5–4%, it does not matter, borrow more money and use it wisely to create some productive assets. And so, he has to look into that aspect. N.K. Singh committee was constituted, and here there are two theories. Urjit Patel theory is, Urjit Patel sometime back stated that government should restrict borrowing, government should restrict fiscal deficit. Otherwise, what will happen in future? Government's interest payment burden will increase, and subsequently for the future generations more and more taxes are to be imposed. So, do not borrow much. That is the advice given by Urjit Patel. And in this article, the author says we can borrow much. We can borrow much provided that is spent on some productive asset. Provided that is spent on creating some productive asset. So, this is the theory of this is the essence of this article, right. So, this is fiscal policy, this is within the purview of Ministry of Finance, and this is monetary policy. Monetary policy is within the purview of Reserve Bank of India. So, monetary policy basically talks about the circulation of money available in the system, the circulation of money available in the system, in the financial system, that is looked after by Reserve Bank of India, which is nothing but monetary policy, and these are the tools meant for that. These are the tools meant for looking at the various tools available in the market. So, the author says borrow more money, spend on productive assets, government should spend more money so that more and more assets will be created, and at the same time Reserve Bank should follow expansionary monetary policy. Reserve Bank should follow expansionary monetary policy. That means Reserve Bank should look at keeping more and more money in circulation. When Reserve Bank keeps more and more money in circulation, then there is a possibility of private investment to crowd in. So, these 3 points are there in this article. Let me put it. One is government can borrow more money. Second thing, that borrowed money must be used for producing productive assets, because government expenditure must be increased, and when government expenditure is increased, then with expansionary monetary policy by Reserve Bank of India, then with expansionary monetary policy of Reserve Bank of India, then private investment will also be pulled up. That means private investment will crowd in, technically speaking, then private investment will also take off, or you can say private investment will also crowd in provided public investment is increased and Reserve Bank follows expansionary monetary policy. So, this is all about this article, and if you look further, before understanding this article, you should have clear idea about government expenditure. Now, plan and non-plan expenditure category is going away. In future, government expenditure will be two parts. One is revenue expenditure, other one is capital expenditure, and not only for the government. These two components must be there for any human being also. In our family also, part of the expenditure can be revenue and part of the expenditure must be capital expenditure. Capital expenditure creates assets. Capital expenditure create house for you. Capital expenditure will be available for the future generations. You will enjoy, not only yourself, future generations will also enjoy when capital expenditure is some part of total expenditure. That is why with the saved money, please purchase some house, please purchase something which will be used for future generations. And let us come back to the governments. Here revenue expenditure, subsidies. Government is giving so many subsidies like LPG subsidy, fertilizer subsidy. So, this is all revenue expenditure. It will not create any asset. Then day to day running expenditure, you cannot avoid that. it is very much essential, and this is committed expenditure, and this is required for day to day running of the government. Then salaries, pensions, you cannot avoid, that is committed expenditure. Then grants are given under special circumstances, and please understand, grant comes under revenue expenditure, loan comes under capital expenditure. This is the basic difference. Why? Grant means it will not come back. Grant means it will not come back. If father-in-law is giving 1 lakh rupees to son-in-law, that is grant. It will never come back. So grant is nothing but just given like that. So grant is revenue expenditure, then interest payments is revenue expenditure. And if you look at capital expenditure, basic thing is creation of assets. If government constructs one dam, if government constructs aims like hospital, then it is capital expenditure, and capital expenditure is required, at least a substantial portion must be capital expenditure, so as to take care of future generations. So here the essence of the article is government can borrow more, it does not matter, but spend on these capital assets. Don't waste money on salaries, subsidies, then pensions, grants. Don't waste like that. You spend the borrowed money for creating capital assets. Just like our own example, borrow money from bank to construct a house, but not borrowing money to lavishly spend in a 5-star hotel. So the difference between revenue expenditure and capital expenditure must be clear to everyone so as to understand economy. So the essence of the article is borrow more, spend on capital expenditure, nothing will happen, because this capital expenditure will create assets, and in future substantial returns are expected with these capital assets. So that is the essence of this. Then another important point is there, at present our GDP is basically driven by 2 factors. Our GDP is basically driven by 2 factors. 2 factors are almost absent for the past 2 years. The 2 factors are public consumption. We are consuming goods. Our population is around 126, 127 crores. Because of huge population, we are creating more and more demand. So because more and more demand is created, that's why the element in the production is quite substantial. So here public consumption is there because of more population, more young population specifically. Second one is government investments. Government investments are okay to some extent, but the biggest drawback is private investments and exports. These 2 things are not satisfactory. That's why our GDP growth is around 7%. Otherwise, it will go up to 10%. Private investments is not coming up well. So to make private investments to take off, then government investments should be increased. By borrowing money, increase government investments, right? I hope that you understood this also. And if government borrows more, I put out 2 scenarios. If government borrows more, there are 2 viewpoints, as I have already told you. First viewpoint is more interest burden, more taxes for future generations. This is the viewpoint of Urjit Patel, and the viewpoint of present author is, if one creates resources with borrowed money, then returns will be more and you need not bother about borrowing. So borrow and create assets, that is what the author tried to say. And as per the author, universal basic income is not appropriate for the country at this juncture. Then more and more public investment, as I have already told you, more and more public investment, that means create resources with expansionary monetary policy. That means the monetary policy should be expansionary with the less interest rates. Interest rates must be reduced further, and that is example of expansionary monetary policy, or you can say dovish monetary policy, and the opposite is contractionary monetary policy, that is when the interest rates are increased. And the author says, reduce interest rates, make available more money in the financial system, let government borrow more money, and that will propel growth. That is all about this article. let us go back, let us go to the last article. This is our democratic deficit. The author clearly writing about the Oxfam report. All of you are familiar with the recent Oxfam report. This is some charity organization. It gave report recently, and two important points are there. 8 rich people own as much wealth as half the world's population in 2016. 8 people in the world, only 8 people in the world, 8 richest people, their wealth is equal to the wealth of 350 crore people. World population is 700 crore. So, 8 people's wealth, rich people's wealth is equal to the wealth of 350 crore people in our country, sorry, in the world. And if you look at our country, richest 1% hold as much that held by 58% of the entire population. So, richest 1% own 58% of the wealth. So, this is basically rich poor gap. It is clearly evident not only across the world as well as in our country also. And if you look at the essence of democracy as per this article, the essence of democracy, there are 2 aspects if you look at democracy. The first aspect is poor and rich are equal in one dimension. That means, if you look at voting, poor and rich, everyone has got 1 vote each. So, there is equality when you look at the institution of voting, or you can say election commission, or the democracy is 100% ensured when you look at this from this equal dimension. So, voting, poor and rich are equal in one dimension, that is voting right, you can say. Then what is the purpose of democracy? Democracy main purpose is redistribution of wealth should be the natural tendency of the democracies. What democracies have to do? Democracy's main purpose is redistribution of wealth. Wealth should not be concentrated in 8 people, 7 people, 100 people, it should be redistributed. That is the main essence of democracy. But we have seen, as per this news, as per this report by Oxfam, this inequalities in wealth, are going up day by day. That is the reason why more and more protectionist tendencies are coming up in several countries nowadays. And a well functioning constitution, what is the purpose of well functioning constitution? The well functioning constitution should look at relative equality in income. There are 2 goals of a well functioning constitution. The first one is relative equality in income. What is the second one? Accessibility to resources for self improvement. Accessibility to everyone for self improvement. Opportunity must be given to each and every citizen of the country. So, these 2 things are essential attributes of a well functioning constitution. But you see, why he used the term democratic deficit? He used the term democratic deficit. Why he used this term? Because of all these reasons. Look at the first one. Rich are becoming further rich. After globalization, this is quite evident across the world. Rich becoming further rich. Not only that, rich poor gap is widening substantially. Rich poor gap is widening substantially. Then another important aspect is access to universal education or health in terms of quality is absent. For the name's sake, there may be schools, there may be hospitals. What about quality? So, here the important point is access to universal education or health in terms of quality is absent. Look at the 4th point. Rich are getting access to parliament or assemblies because of their influence with money. This is the biggest deficit of democracy. Nowadays, more and more crore-patis are becoming members of parliament. More and more crore-patis are becoming members of legislative assemblies. So, in our country, in fact, democratic deficit is the apt word at this juncture. this rich are getting access to parliament or assemblies because of their influence with money, then democratic institutions are functioning to promote ultra rich. So, these are the points which emanated from this article. That is why he aptly called this article as democratic deficit, and the role of the government is to eliminate these disparities. Right friends, with this we came to the end of today's The Hindu editorial discussions. Please do join at 12 o'clock noon for the discussion with regard to comprehension. Have a nice day. Thank you. Thanks a lot.